crazy shakeup. The Bills this morning traded Stefon Diggs. And I want to kind of ask you, like, what do you think this trade means for Brandon Aiyuk? Because I think there's two ways you can take it. You can take it as, maybe the Bills will want to trade for Brandon Aiyuk. Maybe this solidifies that teams are more open to trading these star wide receivers. Or maybe we could take it the opposite and be like, hey, this kind of solidifies that I don't think the 49ers are going to trade Aiyuk at all. Because when you look at the compensation that the Bills got for Stefon Diggs, and we can get into it, he's obviously a different player at a different stage of his career.
Right.
But I was pretty shocked, especially when you think Brandon Aiyuk, whoever, if he was going to get traded to, that team would then have to pay him. Stefon Diggs already has his contract, so it's not like the team that he's being traded to has to trade for him and pay him. Pretty interesting move. Also just kind of shocking because Stefon Diggs is, in my opinion, still, an elite wide receiver, top wide receiver. Yeah. Josh Allen is an incredible QB. Obviously, to start the season last year, we saw a little bit of drama going on there, but I wasn't anticipating a Stefon Diggs trade on the horizon. So when you woke up this morning and saw that, what were your takeaways?
A couple of things. First is just that, as you mentioned, it's a different thing from Aiyuk in that he's 30 and he's a cancer, and Buffalo wanted to move on from him. I mean, they took a dead cap hit to get rid of him.
I'm such a girl that I'm not even like. I'm not actually a horoscope person, but when you said that, I was like, "Oh, why didn't you?" We're talking about his because cancers are overly like emotional and reactionary, and so I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that would make sense." Stefon Diggs totally is. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
18 cancer.
Yes.
Yeah. So they were looking to get out of him, and he's been a diva. He's said, what about my touches? He's basically put himself ahead of the team, and that's why they moved on. Houston, on the other hand, is saying we can use an elite wide receiver that's a great vet. Here's a proven player. We can bring him in. We've got the culture to handle him. Every team tells themselves that. So that's part of what's going on. Is Buffalo unloaded him, and that's why the compensation wasn't that great. And it's not comparable to Aiyuk because he's 25. He's not a cancer. He's not a diva. He works exceptionally hard. He's got a great work ethic and skill set. So I think that the Niners could get a lot more for Aiyuk. The question then becomes, could they get Buffalo's number one? Probably not, because Buffalo has a cap situation that makes it tough for them to go get Brandon Aiyuk. But I still think there are teams that could look at this and say that we're interested in Aiyuk. Pittsburgh, he would be a great fit for them. And so that's a natural trade partner for the Niners, is to look at that. I would trade, say, like Aiyuk and 31 to Pittsburgh for 20 and 51. That's a trade I would make right away.
Okay.
And then you can get Amarius Mims at 20 and a wide receiver at 51, and you still have your second-round pick. So there's a lot that they could still do. But whether that can happen or not, I'm not sure. It's just this draft is so loaded at wide receiver, there could be 6 receivers in the first. That it makes it hard to deal Aiyuk. So I think it's difficult for the Niners to move on. And I still don't think they will. You can look at this and say, Aiyuk makes too much money. He wants 27.5. And that's really fair. That is his market value. But that's his market value in the abstract. That's not his market value for the Niners because they don't throw enough. So you'd be overpaying him at that rate, even though it's what he's worth. Yeah. For the team and the way that they use him, it's not. And so from that perspective, they could move on and say it's just too expensive. But usually what the Niners do is they'll just drag this out like they always do. The number that they're using right now in the contract negotiations is meaningless. It's just contract posturing. And so then you get further down the line, you get toward June, and then we'll see what happens in the actual negotiations. But I would think that eventually it'll get sorted out.
Now, there's a couple things. To start out, I agree. Let's start with the reasons I think that the team would look at the Stefon Diggs trade and maybe say, okay, like the Bills are willing to trade him. Maybe we should be, more open to trading Aiyuk. I think what you're saying with the draft compensation is obviously if they're taking inventory of their team and maybe what has held them back from winning in the immediate. Like if we're talking about, I want to win the Super Bowl, the 49ers want to win the Super Bowl in this upcoming season right now.
Right. Yeah.
Screw, timelines ahead of time. We're going to work, in the future. We haven't won one yet. Let's focus on winning right now, going all in right now while Brock is on his rookie deal. What necessary things were we lacking last year if we were going to go through, the biggest moments, and how would we have won the Super Bowl? Some might say getting the ball in Aiyuk's hands could have, worked in their favor and could have gotten them a Super Bowl. I think Kyle Shanahan's response to that might be, because I find Kyle Shanahan to kind of come off as a defensive person who's not very open to saying, yeah, this was something that I could have changed. So I think he might say, the Aiyuk is number 3 in the progression. When he was just on that Shannon Sharp interview, when they asked him about that 3rd and 4 thing where Brock Purdy tries to get the ball to Juwan Jennings, and I've heard so much criticism towards Brock about that play and not getting the ball to Aiyuk, who was open. Aiyuk admits on that show, he's like, that when I look back at the Super Bowl, there's moments that are sore spots for me because I wish I would have gotten the ball more. That's not one of them, because I'm never supposed to get the ball there. I'm the 3rd option. And that's before they even know that there's a blitz coming. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's no way with the amount of protection that Brock Purdy had that he'd have the time to get the ball to a guy like Brandon B.A. So I can understand looking at this team and going, what's actually most important with Brock Purdy, who has, a skill set that is really tailored and incredible at getting the ball out, throwing with anticipation to the middle of the field. We should look to bolster our offensive line. And if we trade away BA, we can get higher up in this draft. We can get a better guy like your guy Mims and have a solidified starter this year, and maybe even someone who can take over. I think you and I have talked, and I've read some of your articles, that he could potentially even switch to taking over for Trent Williams at some point, right?
Yeah.
If Trent retires. So I can see that. But then on the opposing side, I think that Aiyuk, I understand why Aiyuk would want to be paid more, because I think his argument is, if I was given those amount of targets, I would produce the way that these elite level players are. And why would Kyle Shanahan be hesitant to change his scheme to highlight a guy like Brandon Aiyuk? Especially, obviously, we want to win this or the 49ers want to win this upcoming year. But I think how you smooth transition to Brock being your franchise quarterback is making sure this draft you hit on at least, in between 2 to 4 guys who are going to be solidified starters. And you keep a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, who's around the same age, around the same timeline as Brock Purdy, and you have this team that grows as these veterans start kind of dropping off. I think if we look 2 years down the field, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel are those guys that are all going to, I don't think all those guys plus BA are going to be on the team. You know what I mean? Like,
they're going to transition out of those guys. And they're going to have to do it pretty soon.
And Danny Gray isn't making an appearance. Kim Latu, I wouldn't hold my breath for. So I think that it's important when you do hit on a guy like BA in the draft, who's, been just a role model player of what you want. He's outplayed his draft status, and he was drafted in the 1st round.
Definitely.
I just can't understand not wanting to, navigate your system a little bit to start making him be the number 1 wide receiver. I think he's starting his ascension this last year that just happened, but I think this upcoming year, and then even the year after that, say they get rid of Deebo or Christian McCaffrey, one of those guys, both of those guys, and then BA starts getting even more targets. I think he's not at his breakout year yet. So when you look at Stefon Diggs has had maybe a more decorative career so far, but Diggs is on the downside of his career, and like you said, a locker room cancer. Brandon Aiyuk, by everything that he sounds like, he's 100% behind Brock Purdy. He believes in Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
He carries himself as a leader of this team. He talks about the influence he has in the locker room. And it sounds like he knows that with the youth coming in, the 49ers need a guy like him for the youth to look up to. And maybe it's just like, hey, like Debo's not going to be that guy. Maybe Debo can be friendly, buddy. But if he's not always consistently in shape, always healthy in the way that Brandon Aiyuk is, that's another value that BA brings to the team. Right. So I just can't. I think that Diggs should be worth more in a trade if they were to trade him. The other team should be willing to give up more. You have to look at Diggs. When the Vikings traded him, he got more. Like Diggs is 30. He's older. Aside from all the problems he's had an inconsistent, not just like in the locker room, but also just play-wise. He's been more inconsistent play-wise, and he's older. He's suffered more injuries. Brandon Aiyuk is at the highlight, or not even at the highlight, on the highlight of his career.
He's in ascension. Yeah, he's about to have his best years. So he hasn't played his best yet, but he's about to.
So if I'm the 49ers, I want to hold on to him, and I want to make sure that my team, and especially if I'm, really believe in this quarterback has a guy like Brandon Aiyuk. So that's how I feel if I'm the 49ers. And if I'm a different team, I'm willing to trade a lot more than whatever I was willing to trade for Stefon Diggs, because I know when I'm getting Diggs, I'm getting a guy who's been a malcontent in multiple locker rooms, and I'm getting a guy who's been inconsistent, suffered with injuries, and unfortunately is on the latter side of his career now. So from both sides, if I'm the 49ers, I want to hold on to him more than, I would be willing to give up. I definitely wouldn't accept anything close to, just a second round pick, which is what
Diggs just got. Yeah. Well, I think that the apples and apples is you have to compare Diggs when he first got traded. Like 5 years ago. And that was for a first-round pick that was then used on Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
So
and also
you
that's
need to look at it that way.
I will say, though, I think some people, they, refer to that, and they're like, see, the 49ers should do that and just, draft the next Jefferson. And it's very important to highlight that that's not normally what happens.
No,
that was crazy luck for them.
They got lucky, and good for them. They did that. But the important point, though, is that Diggs got a first-round pick, and that if the Niners were to now trade Aiyuk, I think that they would be reasonable in saying we want a first-rounder back for Brandon, and so that should be the market is 20 to 32. Somebody with a pick in that range would be willing if they value what Aiyuk brings. And that's why I go to Pittsburgh, because teams always value the guy that burned you. Aiyuk had one of his best games of the year against Pittsburgh. 130 yards, 2 touchdowns in the block for McCaffrey. So they're going to look at that and say, that's a guy that can help set our culture. And they'd be willing, I think, to give up a pick if you gave them 31. And so it's just a question of who would have the right value in the way that they look at Aiyuk and say that, okay, he can be a difference maker for us. But for the Niners, I think to your point, you have to say he can be a part of the core, the young core with Purdy going forward. But in order to make that work, you then have to also say, I'm willing to transition more to Purdy as a center point of the offense. I'm willing to transition to Aiyuk as the top target, and I'm willing to transition by investing in the offensive line. If Shanahan's willing to do all those things, great. Then it makes perfect sense to keep Brandon Aiyuk. And that's the thing, is that Shanahan being so stubborn and so unwilling to confront what he's done that has hurt the team in trying to win a ring, that if he's not willing to change, then I can see them saying that, well, we don't throw the ball enough for Brandon Aiyuk to be worth $27.5 million to us. And so you can look around. But it's still going to be difficult to find a trade partner. It's still going to be difficult to get somebody in the draft that you think could replace Aiyuk because he has such a unique skill set. He does so many different things well. It's very hard to get somebody that does all that. You would get part of it. You wouldn't get all of it. So they would have to transition. But if I had to guess, my guess is that they will keep Aiyuk, but they will do it their way, which means stretching out the contract negotiation way too long, Aiyuk holding out from camp, and it's just a mess. And all of that's avoidable. And I look at this and just say that, okay, the Niners are willing to pay him $23, he wants $27.5. Pay him the money he wants. That's $4.5 million. That's money that you were just going to spend on this tight end from Detroit. They just matched it. So why can't you use that $6 million you were going to spend on Wright and give it to Aiyuk, and you're a much better team as a result? I don't understand it. It's too invested in winning the contract negotiation. Oh, we made him wait. We made him hold out. We made him come down from his number. No. Do what the team needs, not what your ego requires. Get him signed. Get him here. Build your core. Go forward. To me, that's what makes the most sense. But that requires changes in the way they do things. And they're bad at that.
So now I want to ask you, because I do think it is likely that maybe the 49ers want Brandon Aiyuk to play this year on his 5th-year option and then have the ability to re-sign him next year. And I was DMing you about this, but just for people who don't know, because I definitely needed some clarification, because I think with the amount of different rules that people have, depending on the round that they were drafted and stuff, if the 49ers have Brandon B.A. play on his 5th-year option this year, and then they extend him a contract offer next year, is Brandon Aiyuk a free agent? He has the right to say no to that and be like, I want to go to a different team, or is he still under contract?
He's still under contract.
Okay.
Yeah, he would not become an unrestricted free agent. So they could say that we're just going to let you play on your 5th-year deal, and then we're going to give you a franchise tag contract, and he still has to sign that. He could hold out and say, I don't want to sign a tag deal. The franchise tag this year is 21.8. Next year, depends on how high the cap rises. It'll be more. But they could do that. The problem with that all is what happens when Aiyuk holds out, and what happens if he then says, I'm not going to start the year with you. I'm only going to join the team so that I get enough games played to accrue the year. I mean, he can't hold out all year long because otherwise he doesn't get the contract year.
Yeah,
but other than that,
he wants to. Doesn't he want to play well so that other teams are willing to give him the contract? I think it makes it like another contract year for him, because he basically has to prove that he can, replicate what he did last year again this year, so that another team is willing to pay for him again. He basically has to repeat that process.
Yeah, to a degree, but the Niners would still hold his rights, so they could say, we're going to put you on your 5th-year deal, and then we're going to franchise tag you, and you're not a free agent, and there's nothing you can do about it. He's stuck. And that's part of the problem is that, so I think that the problem for them, the main one is, what happens to your record next year if Aiyuk holds out? How are you going to open the year? This year they opened well, and it was key to them getting the 1 seed. If Aiyuk holds out, what's the team's offense going to look like to start the year? They could have trouble. They could stumble out of the gate. They go 500. They're not going to get the 1 seed. And then what are their chances at the Super Bowl? They have to weigh all of that.
Yeah. But I don't think that they'd be worried about him holding out. I think that's my question is I don't think
he would.
I don't think it's actually realistic anymore. Really? You do?
No, I think he would hold out because he could. He doesn't have to hold out for the entire year, but he can hold out for a while. He can hold out in camp. He can hold out to miss games. He won't be happy if he says, okay, the Niners aren't even willing to extend me, and now I have to play on my 5th-year option deal. It's a lot less money. It's $14 million to play in the 5th year, and he wants an extension at $27.5. He's going to be angry, and so he's going to hold out. And I think that he would hold out for the opening games, and the Niners would lose those games. And now all of a sudden you're hoping to get to the Super Bowl, and you haven't started well. That's a problem.
Very true. That's they definitely need to avoid that. No cost do they want a malcontent in the locker room. I think half of the things aside from his play that we were talking about with BA is just his energy in the locker room, his connection with the players and with Purdy. All that goes off the window if he starts getting mad at the organization and expressing that.
You lose his goodwill.